We are about a quarter of the way through the 2025 NFL season, and it's clear who is contending and who has a legitimate chance to play in Super Bowl 60 in February in San Francisco. And some teams are off to very hot starts to the 2025 season and are playing at a very high level. And for reference, the Buffalo Bills have scored 30 or more points in every game, and the Eagles are 4-0 after coming off of a dominant 2024 postseason run. But not every team is perfect, and the defending champions and their fan base especially know this, as they've already shown a lot of frustration towards their offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo just a couple of games into the season. And this may come as a surprise, but the Eagles only have one game above 300 yards to start the 2025 season. And in today's video, we're going to discuss the biggest threats to several NFL contenders. We will discuss what's went right, what's went wrong, and why these teams could be bounced when the playoffs roll around. There will be a few extra teams mentioned at the end as well, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing the Green Bay Packers. The Packers are 2-1-1 after a shocking loss to the Browns in Week 3, and perhaps even crazier, a tie to the Cowboys in Week 4. And after the first 2 weeks of the season, I was quick to say that this is a Super Bowl caliber defense, and that the Packers are going to be a problem throughout the entire 2025 season. And if you would have asked me at that point in time what I thought their record would be entering their Week 5 bye, knowing they were playing the Browns and the Cowboys in the following weeks, especially with what would be Micah Parsons' return to Big D, well, I would have unequivocally said 4-0, and I would have went a step further and said they're playing the Bengals in Week 6 off of their bye week, and I would have said 5-0. And for clarity, I would have said that before the atrocity we saw on Monday night between the Bengals and Broncos. But here we are in the present day, and the Packers are 2-1-1. And the loss to the Browns was extremely frustrating because on paper, the Packers are a better team than Cleveland. That should not be a hot take or a take that anyone disagrees with, but they didn't show up against Cleveland, and by the way, a huge credit goes to the Browns defense for holding them to just 230 yards over the course of the game, as well as forcing a timely Jordan Love interception, which set up Cleveland for a game-winning drive to which Andre Schmidt successfully converted to put the Packers at 2-1. And naturally, when a winning team like Green Bay, that's had a lot of success, not just in history, but specifically over the last few years, loses, well, teams like that very rarely lose 2 in a row, and they very rarely lose 2 in a row when the opposing team's best player is out the following week in CeeDee Lamb. And Dak Prescott played tremendous in the Week 4 game, but this is where Green Bay's biggest threat comes in, and it's themselves. The end of the first half sequence for Green Bay I thought was pretty straightforward. They got the ball back on their 20-yard line with 41 seconds left. If nothing happens on the first play, then fall on the ball and take it to halftime. But they didn't, and they kept trying to make something happen, and Jordan Love was eventually strip-sacked, and Dallas capitalized and scored a touchdown before half to make it 16-13 at intermission. And the end of the overtime period was also horrendous clock management, as I thought the final play of the game was going to be on the incomplete pass to Matthew Golden from the 16-yard line, and that the Packers were going to live or die with the result. And what also hurt this team against Dallas was once Dallas made it 13-2 after a blocked point after return, the Packers looked different, and it looked like when the bully on the schoolyard gets punched back that they didn't know what to do, and that was not the case in any of the first 3 games, defensively speaking. Even though they lost, they did not look bad at any point defensively during the Browns game, and this is why I largely believe the biggest threat they have is themselves. We saw the way they played the Lions back in Week 1, and we saw how dominant they can be at times in the first quarter of the year. Now, for clarity, I don't think the Packers will dominate the Lions the way they did the next time these teams play at Ford Field, but we have seen the dominant flashes from Green Bay, and that also includes the Week 2 game against Washington, and when they got punched back, it was like they didn't know what to do, defensively of course. They've had a lot of injuries up front along the offensive line, and I acknowledge that, but that doesn't have anything to do with the concern for the purpose of today's video. I think they will be fine, but right now the biggest question I have for the Packers is, how will you respond the next time a great team bucks back and punches you in the mouth? The Kansas City Chiefs are up, and the biggest concern or threat to the Chiefs at this point in time is the run game on both sides of the football. Now, as I record this video, the Chiefs are coming off of a game against the Ravens in Week 4, in which they put up 37 points, Patrick Mahomes threw for 4 touchdowns, Xavier Worthy was back, and they looked like a completely different team. And I think there's 2 ways to look at this right now if you are a Chiefs fan. The first, of course, is, hey, whenever we were a more healthy team, which has been a big thing throughout the entire 2025 season, not just for the Chiefs, Chiefs, but really everyone is. It seems there's a lot more injuries this year than normal, but whenever the Chiefs were more healthy, they looked like a significantly better team. Xavier Worthy led the team in rushing, he led the team in receiving, Patrick Mahomes had a great game, and they looked like the 2019 or 2020 Chiefs. There is the other side of the coin where I think you can say, hey, they were playing the Ravens, who have allowed over 130 points in the first 4 games of the year, and we discussed this in a video recently, but the Ravens in 2025 have allowed 16 touchdowns in 4 games, and the legendary 2000 Ravens defense allowed 17 touchdowns in the entire season, which also included the postseason, which was 4 more postseason games. So 16 touchdowns in 4 games for the 2025 Ravens, 17 touchdowns for the 2000 Ravens in 20 total games. And there's definitely that side of the coin where you can say, okay, look, the Chiefs were good in this game, but they were also playing a very bad defense. And I also think that the run game is a concern at this point in time, because through 4 games, the Chiefs' leading rusher is still, you guessed it, Patrick Mahomes. And obviously Patrick Mahomes leading the team in rushing is not going to be sustainable for this team's long-term success. But what I will also say in favor of the Chiefs, that whenever Rashee Rice comes back, I do expect the offense to open up more, and inevitably when the postseason rolls around, because I do think that the Chiefs will make the postseason, as I would imagine everyone thinks the Chiefs will at minimum make the postseason. I have a very complicated strategy in terms of picking games that keep up with me here. I don't know if it's going to be too complicated for anyone to understand, but don't bet against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. So I do think everything will work out naturally over the course of time, but it is absolutely worth noting how lackluster their run game, specifically from Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, who really do not have many explosive runs at all, have been through the first quarter of the year. The other side of the coin with the 2025 Chiefs and what could be a big threat to them is how bad their rushing defense has been through the first 4 games. They are bottom 5 in both average yards per carry against and defensive EPA rushing per play, and obviously that's not going to be good over the course of a 17-game season, because you want to be able to have a baseline of being able to defend the run, especially when you're at a conference with a team like the Buffalo Bills, who of course love to run the football. And I do want to credit the Chiefs, as they did a solid job against the Chargers back in week 1, a team that also loves to run the football, as Omarion Hampton was in his NFL debut, though I do think Omarion has gotten going over the course of a season, and that's going to be another team that you're going to play at some point in the year for the Chiefs to be able to potentially get their revenge against the Chargers. But if you cannot consistently stop the run, whether your quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, whoever, that's going to be a problem, and that absolutely has to be noted with where the Chiefs currently are. And I do think the Chiefs are going to be tested in a big way, especially a couple of days after this video is released, as they play at Jacksonville in week 5 on Monday night, and then play the Lions in week 6. And Travis Etienne has ran for 120 yards in 2 of the first 4 games of the 2025 season, and the Lions are, of course, the Lions. They have Sonic and Knuckles in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and they absolutely love to run the football. So the Chiefs are absolutely going to be battle-tested in the coming weeks with their run defense, and again, I do think the offense will get going. I do worry about their running back specifically, and while Xavier Worthy was a good player in week 4 against the Ravens, I think Chiefs fans would also acknowledge that they don't want Xavier Worthy leading the team in rushing every single week because of what that implies with their team's run game. So that was a fun game. I don't want to take that away, but you don't want a receiver leading your team in rushing every single week for obvious reasons. This is admittedly getting a little further down the line than we should entering week 5, but it is something that I at least want to bring up of the possibility of things that could happen. Obviously, as a defense, you need to be able to stop the run, as at times it can be grown man strength running the football. We're going to run the football down your throat until you prove you can stop it. And there's a team right now in the AFC that is really good at running the football, not just the Buffalo Bills, although they certainly apply, and it's the Indianapolis Colts. Now, if it came down to it in the AFC divisional round, whether the Daniel Jones-led Colts were going into Arrowhead Stadium, or even if the Chiefs were going into Lucas Oil to play the Colts, I would choose the Kansas City Chiefs to beat the Colts in that situation. But that would be a more difficult matchup for the Chiefs than people would probably be willing to admit, because of how good Jonathan Taylor is, and with how good the Colts offensive line has played throughout the early parts of the 2025 season. Entering week 4, Quentin Nelson was the 4th highest run blocking graded guard per PFF, and obviously you see that with the way that Jonathan Taylor is running the football, not just behind Big Q, but he is a legit offensive player of the year candidate, and if you cannot stop a player of Jonathan Taylor's caliber in a one-game do-or-die scenario, then that would be a pretty tough draw for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, again, I do go back to the idea that I generally don't bet against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the postseason, but this is something that over the course of the next 10, 11, 12 weeks that the Chiefs need to be able to figure out and not enter the 2025 postseason as the 5th worst rushing defense in football. The Seattle Seahawks are up, and through 4 games, they're 3-1 with victories over the Steelers, Saints, and Cardinals. And through 4 games, there's been a lot of positive flashes for this team. Sam Darnold is playing at a high level, and when it's crunch time and hell or high water, Darnold has came through far more often than not. And so is third-year receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is currently second in the NFL in receiving yards, only behind Rams receiver Puka Nacua, who looks to be off to a historic start to the 2025 season himself. But despite being 3-1, there's been several things to be frustrated about for Seahawks fans, and I think the biggest threat to them at the moment is the inconsistencies in the run game as well as coaching decisions. I love Mike Macdonald and was a huge fan of this hire when it was made, and it's not fair to attribute the 2023 Ravens defensive success solely to Macdonald, but I don't think it's a coincidence the Seahawks defense is where they are now, and the Ravens defense is where they are now. And through 4 games, the Seahawks have allowed 20 points just once, and they've allowed more than 285 yards just once, which was back in week 1 to the 49ers. And my concern with Seattle is through a few examples we've seen in the early parts of the year, the first of which occurred in their only loss of the year, which was back in week 1 to San Francisco. It was 3rd and 7 with 3:40 to play on the 49ers 25-yard line in a tie game, and Seattle completed a pass to Cooper Kupp for a gain of 6 yards to set up 4th and 1. And Seattle had the ball on the 49ers 19-yard line, and they kicked a field goal to make it a 13-10 game. San Francisco then went down and scored a touchdown to make it 17-13, and on the ensuing drive, Darnold completed a beautiful ball in crunch time to Jackson Smith-Njigba to get the ball into San Fran territory and to potentially set them up for a chance to win. Eventually, Nick Bosa made a tremendous play, and Sam Darnold fumbled the ball, and San Francisco recovered, and they won. And in week 4 against Arizona, there was a 4th and 1 situation early in the game where Seattle opted to go for it on the Cardinals' 48-yard line. Rookie guard Gray Zabel was blown up immediately by Dalvin Tomlinson, which forced Zach Charbonnet to bounce it outside, and there was nowhere to go. And generally speaking, it's the little things that win or lose games, and I was also really frustrated with how the Seahawks handled this game against Arizona at the end, mainly because they had several opportunities to put the game away, yet never did. And I have been a believer in the Seahawks and the process of what they are trying to accomplish since Mike Macdonald took over, but I worry about what they're going to do against the elite of elite teams, because the reality is if they mess around the way they did against Arizona, especially in the postseason against a team like Detroit or Philly or even the Rams, teams that have had consistent winning culture and success over the past few years, then they'll be bounced. Now, I do also want to acknowledge that the Seahawks coaching staff has made adjustments where necessary over the first few games, and the game plan they had against the 49ers was not great, offensively that is, as there were a lot of screens, and the team's second leading receiver in that game had just 15 receiving yards, so they have gotten better at moving the ball around and getting their playmakers involved, most notably Cooper Kupp, who is second on the team in receiving yards through 4 games. I also thought Elijah Arroyo showed flashes against Arizona, and that rookie Torrey Horton has looked good when called upon, and he is a player who is actually second amongst rookies in receiving touchdowns with 2 on the year, only behind the Bucs' Emeka Egbuka, who has 4, but one thing that is absolutely worth noting with the Seahawks through the first few weeks is how conservative they get at times, and even when they choose to go for it, which I completely agreed with within the Arizona game, is not having the horses to be able to get the job done. The offensive line was a major issue last year, and it's not a coincidence. They're 28th in yards per carry this year and 27th in rushing EPA per play a quarter of the way through the season. And my biggest concern for Seattle is not having enough offensively when it matters most. The Buffalo Bills are up, and right now they're 4-0, and they've scored 30 or more points in every game. Josh Allen is playing at an MVP level. James Cook is playing at an Offensive Player of the Year caliber level, and he's averaging over 100 yards rushing per game, as through 4 games, he has 401 rushing yards, therefore technically over 100 yards per game, and the receiving room is doing a good job of consistently hauling in passes, and they have 4 players over 130 receiving yards through 4 games, and with the way Buffalo has built this offense, I think there is a legit case to be made that, and this is very situation specific, I don't want this to think that you can have a bottom 5 quarterback and be able to do this, but with Josh Allen, I think there's a case to be made that, hey, as long as we have an everybody eats offense, we can have 2 or 3 wide receiver 2s rather than needing a true wide receiver 1 that gets 180 targets per year. That way we keep opposing defenses guessing every single week of who's getting the football. Keon Coleman had over 100 yards back in week 1 against the Ravens, has not had 100 yards since, and guess what? The Bills have put up 30 or more points in every single game. So I think there is some validation to the belief that you can have multiple wide receiver 2s and still be fine as an offense. Obviously, this is with the stipulation that you have an MVP caliber quarterback to begin with, but good for Buffalo for starting the year the way they have. And with the Bills, my biggest concern has nothing to do with the offense. They are a Super Bowl caliber offense. They will continue to cook, and honestly, I think there's a very real chance that the Bills have 14 or more wins this year. The schedule is not difficult for them, and whenever you can start out the schedule knowing you're going to be playing 6 games against the Jets, Dolphins, and Patriots, well, you're already in a good position. And one of their more difficult games was back in week 1 against the Ravens, in which they put up 41 points in a dramatic come from behind win, and they started out 1-0. However, my biggest concern with the Bills showed up in that Ravens game, and it's showed up in the following 3 weeks. Though I would kind of dismiss the Jets game because of how much they dismantled the Jets throughout that entire game, minus a 54-yard drive that started with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, whenever Buffalo was already up 4 scores. So in some ways, that final drive against the Jets didn't really count because it was a 54-yard drive. The Jets had 154 yards of offense. You get the point. The Bills dominated that game. But within the past couple of weeks, and including the Ravens game back in week 1, the Bills' rushing defense has not been good. And through 4 weeks, the Bills are 31st in rushing yards allowed. And like we mentioned with the Chiefs, if you cannot consistently stop the run, especially when cold weather football rolls around, and especially when teams are going to probably be going into Buffalo, because with how easy Buffalo's schedule is, I think there's a very real chance that this team gets the number 1 seed and that the AFC is going to go through Buffalo. And like we mentioned with Kansas City, a team who also cannot stop the run the best at this specific point in time, where if you can't stop the run in January, then there is a very real possibility that we have a 2019 Titans type team go into either Buffalo or Kansas City and win. And that team, presumably at this point in time, would be somebody like the Colts, maybe somebody else who we haven't seen yet that could come out of nowhere and have a really good run game. And if the Buffalo Bills or the Kansas City Chiefs turn the ball over once or twice, maybe they start pressing. And again, I know that this is several months down the road, but that is a possibility for a team that cannot consistently stop the run. I don't worry about the Bills' offense in 2025 for obvious reasons. They've put up 30 or more points in every game to start the 25 season. They had a big 30-plus point streak last year, and whenever you look at the Bills' offense, look who's at the helm. They're going to be fine. The biggest thing that I worry about is the team's ability to stop the run, and I think that's especially going to matter for a team like Buffalo, who is more than likely going to be playing in a 0-degree or a 15-degree game in January, because I don't think it's going to be 75 and sunny in Buffalo in January when the Colts or somebody else comes into play that's going to want to pound the rock and really establish the run. Now, with the Philadelphia Eagles, this is a very interesting team because they have all the talent in the world. If you told me right now that we'd have the Eagles go back to the Super Bowl and represent the NFC and even go back-to-back champions, I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I don't think anybody would be. But with where this offense currently is, they've only had one 300-yard game in the first 4, and they've had multiple halves of games where they've looked not okay, but downright bad. They didn't complete a pass in the second half against the Bucs. They had a woeful first half against the Rams in week 3, and there is reason to be concerned at the moment, though I do think for clarity that the Eagles will figure it out, and that they also had problems through the first 4 weeks last year, and the biggest difference between through 4 weeks of 2024 and 2025 is they were 2-2 through 4 weeks last year. They had the big Kirk Cousins come back on Monday night. They were blown out in Tampa Bay by 17 points, so it is definitely worth mentioning that Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, and Lane Johnson were all out for that week 4 game, yet this year they are 4-0. With the Philadelphia Eagles right now, I think they're eventually going to figure it out, and I think it's a classic case of a team starting slow and that they are far too talented to continue at the rate that they are and only have one 300-yard game in the first 4. It is also worth noting right now that they are bottom 5 in average yards per carry, and right now punter Braden Mann had a minus 34-yard run against the Bucs. Obviously, with one minus 34-yard run in one of the first 4 games is going to significantly impact your yards per carry as a team. So with that, they're averaging 3.5 yards per carry. carry. Without that, they're averaging 3.73 yards per carry, which is still not very good, though I do think once this team, and every other team for that matter, gets more healthy, they're going to prove to be a much better team. AJ Brown also had a tweet after the Bucs game, and I know AJ Brown fantasy owners have been displeased to start the year, though I think that will change significantly soon as well. With the Lions and Rams, I think both teams are extremely talented, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if either of those teams go to the Super Bowl either, but the biggest concern that I have with the Lions and Rams at this point in time is the secondary, because when you look at each team's offense, while they have different skill level or skill position players and different levels to those said skill position players, they're each a team that can put up 30 plus points every week, and as long as the secondary can be league average or not a net negative, each team is going to be fine in the long run, and I really can't wait to see how the NFC plays out, because this conference is absolutely loaded. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as we are closing in on 215,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.